Hi, zoology. Okay, we are going to have a set of notes today. It's over evolution and some of the development, kind of going back to what we've been talking about in terms of coelms. So this is just a preface for it. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, here we are. So this is typically a talk that I like to have at the beginning of the year, but because of the virtualness and the flippy flopping, I decided to kind of put it towards the middle where I knew I would get the most of my students and we could kind of have an understanding of what we've already been talking about. So first off, we're discussing what evolution is. So evolution is gradual changes in a population over time. We can't see evolution changes in individuals. It doesn't happen that way. It happens on such a small scale, like literally changes in your DNA caused by mutations. So mutations can sometimes be good for us. There's these terms microevolution and macroevolution. Those are kind of misleading. They mean the same thing, just micro with small, tiny evolutions that you see, which turn into large evolutions. What we're really thinking about in terms of macroevolution is talking about speciation, which is the creation of a new species because they've evolved to be so different from the species or the ancestor that they had before. This guy is Charles Darwin. He's known as the father of evolution. But it's actually pretty funny because he wasn't the first or only person to discuss some of the ideas of natural selection and evolution. He was just the first person and the most famous one to get published. Wallace was publishing and going through the same ideas that he was when Darwin wrote his Origin of Species. So he's not alone in his ideas. It's actually been talked about many times with other people. So evolution, it is called the theory of evolution, yes. And so when we talk about theories in just normal everyday language, we are using theory in terms of like, that's my guess, that's my hypothesis kind of talk. Like, I have a theory about what the new Avengers movie is going to be about, you know, things like that. However, when we talk about theory in science, theory is like the highest, most like profound thing that you could think about. It's the one that's been most studied. It has the most evidence. It has everything that backs it up. So theory is the best you could possibly be. Some people believe that it goes hypothesis, turns into a theory, turns into a law. That's actually incorrect. Hypothesis is the basis for all scientific explanations and discoveries. And it can branch off into two. It can either turn into a law or it can turn into a theory. A law describes how something occurs, so the mechanisms behind it, and the theory describes why it's happening, so the actual like concept behind it. So you can have both. There are a bunch of different forms of evidence for evolution. Some of them you might have seen before when you were in your biology class, so hopefully this won't be a completely new topic. I'm gonna sip my tea. So the first and probably the biggest one is embryonic development. If we look at the first row, organisms that are closely related or have a lot of DNA that is in common, because that's the driving force behind development, is how your DNA is structured or what genes you have. Organisms that are closely related and have close DNA ties are going to look similar as they develop from embryo to organism. All of these at the beginning kind of look like little shrimpy things. The fish, salamander, tortoise, chick, hog, calf, rabbit, and human, all of these are vertebrates. So all of them have a spinal column, and they look very similar in that first stage of development. However, when we move into the second stage of a development, we start to see some distinguishing characteristics in the fish and the salamander. That's because they have certain genes and certain characteristics that lead them to one path of development, whereas the other organisms lead them to another. And then finally, in the third stage, you can see some distinctive characteristics for the tortoise and the chick. They still kind of look similar. And then the hog, calf, rabbit, and human have very similar characteristics because they're all mammals. So those will have very similar things. Looking at homologous structures, so homo means same. So these organisms have the same bone structures and same bone layouts across the board in the arm. So they have the carpals, which are the little bones in the wrist. The cats do, the whales do, bats do, birds do. They all have those same. They have the long finger bones, which are called phalanges. They have a radius, they have an ulna, they have a humerus. So they have all of the arm bones that make it up, and they're even laid out fairly similar. So that's one. And then last but not least is the vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are remnants of a common ancestor that they had beforehand, structures that they don't utilize anymore but are still there. In this whale, they have a pelvic bone, and some even have like little bits of like leg bones left. Obviously, the whales don't need a pelvic bone because pelvic bones are mostly for legs and hips, and they don't utilize legs anymore because they don't have to. But this just comes back to the fact that whales had an ancestor that had walking legs and then developed to where they didn't need them anymore. In humans, we can see this in an appendix. We have an appendix which was used to digest plant material. However, we don't have a huge diet that consists of plant matter, so we don't need an appendix anymore, but it's still there. When we look at different organisms, we can see how they've changed over many years. This is done through fossil records because obviously we weren't there 50 million years ago, but you can definitely see the differences and the changes that have come. So this example is of a horse. Horses have changed their environment and where they've lived. Originally, they were in like some kind of woodsy, foresty area where they had to be small because of the trees were restricting in their size. They ate different foods because they were eating more like leaves off of plants rather than grasses. And they needed to have more stable footing, so they had toes. However, as years went on, they moved out of the woods and into more grass flatland areas where they grazed on grass. They didn't need as much stable footing, and they could get much bigger because they were out in the open. So as you can see, from 50 million years to 35 million years, that's, let's do the math there on, my calculator wasn't even on, minus 35. That's 15 million years, still a really long time to increase your size, to have a different foot structure, and to have a different skull shape is huge. So there's big changes there. We looked at scientists have looked at different bone structures and different fossil records of these animals to see them migrate from the woods areas into their current habitats. Okay, so now we're on to kind of the things that we've been talking about in terms of coeloms. So going back to our embryonic development and thinking about how organisms evolve, we're going to look at how organisms can show relationship. So it's all about the blastopore. So the blastopore is a hole from the splitting of the cells. So when your first fertilized egg, that one cell divides into 2 cells, divides into 4, divides into 8, divides into 16, 32, keeps going and going and going until it forms a ball of cell. which is called a blastula. This is a ball of cell. Then the first hole that forms, which is right here, is called a blast pore, and that's what forms the gut. So your digestive system was the first thing that was built inside your body, because we got to get nutrients, and nutrients is only through the digestive system. So that was a really important factor for you to have first. However, we have two different types. We can have this thing called a protostome. I wish I could make that bigger. Okay. And deuterostome. All right, so we have these two things called the protostome and deuterostome. And the biggest difference between the protostome and the deuterostome is what develops first in the digestive system. So we can have a mouth that develops first, or we can have an anus that develops first. In the protostomes, the mouth develops first. Okay, and then in the deuterostomes, the anus develops first. And that's a big difference between organisms. A mouth that develops first and an anus that develops first. Fun fact, humans are deuterostomes, so take what you will out of that. All right, next. Oops, I went too fast. Okay, body plans. So we've already kind of talked about acoeloms and pseudocoeloms. The platyhelminthes were acoelomates, and the nematodes were pseudocoelomates. What the coelom is a empty space inside the body that allows for organs to develop. So acoelomates, our platyhelminthes, don't have a body cavity at all. So they don't have any space for organs to develop. In the pseudocoelom, there is some space, so they are able to develop organs. When we looked at the nematodes, when I dissected one, you could see the structures inside, you can see the different organs. They have only one muscle layer. So that muscle layer is attached to the ectoderm, and it's used in both moving and digesting. If you think about when you eat, like there's muscles that move the food down your esophagus, in your stomach, and through your intestines. All of that is controlled by muscle. So if you only have one set of muscle, you have to choose between eating or moving. So that's my choice. That's kind of the problem with pseudocoeloms, and that's why we only see it in a small portion. The eucoelom, or true coelom, has two muscle layers, has a muscle layer on the outside and a muscle layer on the inside. So that's more effective because it allows for you to not have to choose between moving and eating. You can do both at the same time. I could eat some food and then realize I see a predator and then run away. And I don't have to decide, what I'm gonna do. It just is done. And I think I answered the last one. So the eucoelom is superior because it allows for multitasking and allows for you to move and eat at the same time. So the next time that you are running and eating a cheeseburger, thank your eucoelom. All right, I'm gonna stop screen sharing and hope you guys got everything you needed. At the bottom of these notes, go ahead and write a quick 2 to 3 sentence summary about the most important parts of this. All right, bye guys.